Okay. Hi, everybody. This is Julie, and I am going to today tell you how you can move your InterMine, your current InterMine checkout, and migrate it to use InterMine 2.0. I am recording now, but I think that if you do have a question, I think you want to just interrupt me because odds are the question you have will be useful to other people, and we have a small group today. So please interrupt. Okay, so the reason why we're here is because InterMine 2.0 is not backwards compatible. You're going to need you're going to have to update your code. You're going to need to do new databases and new web apps. It won't work with the old stuff. The reason why it's not backwards compatible is because we changed the directory structure to be Maven, the default Maven one, instead of the current InterMine custom whatever we have. We switched our build system to use Gradle, and we also changed the data model. So these are the reasons why it's not backwards compatible. To upgrade, you are going to need to do, we have two scripts that you're going to run that's going to move your directory structure from what it is now to the default Maven directory structure, the standard directory structure. And you're also going to have to update your data parsers to match the new data model. So that's what it takes to upgrade. And then going forward, your development process is going to change, or it's not, your process isn't going to change. The ant commands you run will be replaced with the new Gradle commands. And so I am going to go through all of that today. Okay, so let's get started. So I'm looking at the upgrade InterMine page. So Gradle. So we're using Gradle now instead of Ant to compile, to manage our dependencies, to compile and build everything. So right here, I have some links that I think you'll want to use. So I have a Gradle quick start here. And that I'm going to go through that next. So that tells you all of the Gradle commands that you want to use. And then I have a Gradle FAQ. So these are for people who have already upgraded. These are common errors that they have encountered and how to fix them. And also the final link is the Gradle blog post. So this went through why we made the changes that we did, and I think that'd be useful for you to read over. So those links will be handy references for you. Okay, so the first thing you need to do to upgrade is to install Maven. So we use Maven to manage dependencies. So your specific, your mine data sources. You don't need to install Gradle. Instead, we provide a wrapper, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So the next thing you do after you install Maven is you're going to have to remove core InterMine code. So InterMine now works a little bit differently. So currently you check out the entire repository and you copy in your mine and you compile everything. Instead, we've compiled the jars, InterMine jars, and those are available on Maven, and you're only going to be responsible for compiling your mine-specific code. So you are going to have to separate out your code from the current repo. I think that some mines already have their mine in a repo and their sources in a repo. In this case, you can skip this step, but I would recommend making a Gradle branch. But most people have their mine and their data sources in the InterMine repository. In that case, you'll need to separate them out. Now, there's two ways to separate things out. There's the good way and the bad way. So the bad way is you can just separate them out. You can just move the directories out into their own Git repo. You don't do this, though. You lose history. I'm going to do this now, but because I'm just showing you what to do, but don't do it. Instead, Git has a filter branch command, and you want to do this. This is what I did for HumanMine and FlyMine. So if you follow directions, it'll take your mine directory, it'll delete everything else, and only keep your mine, your subdirectory, and all of its associated history. So that's what you want to do. But that's not what I'm going to do. So just for, I hope you can see my terminal. Just for demonstration, I'm going to do the bad way. So I'm going to copy my InterMine FlyMine directory to FlyMine. And, oops, if I get the command right. And I'm going to copy my InterMine bio sources FlyMine. Okay, so if I go to FlyMine, that's our normal web app that we have, right? You are familiar with that. And then these are all my FlyMine specific data sources. Now, like I mentioned before, so the Uniprot and PubMed, all the data sources that we share are already on Maven compiled. So you're not responsible for those. Those will be put on your class path and with no effort from you. These are FlyMine specific data sources that nobody else cares about. So you'll only have to worry about your mine specific data sources. Okay, so I've separated them out quite brutally into two different directories. So now what I will want to do is we switch to use the standard Maven directory structure.
Julie?
So you're going to have to run 2 migration scripts to move these 2 directories over to the new layout. And I'll do that because the scripts are in this repository. So if you clone that, then you'll be able to get the scripts locally. So I'm going to run those now. So I'm going to run one to migrate the mine over to the new Gradle structure, and then one for the data sources. So let's do that now. So I'm going to go to InterMine scripts. So I cloned this repo earlier. And I'm going to go to Gradle migration mine. And I'm going to run the migrate mine script. And I'm going to give it the full path to the mine that directory I just made. Oh, okay. I forgot. So I copied over the thing, but it does a git moves. So I'm going to just really quick initialize a new repo. And again, you won't want to do this. And so all I did was I ran this command. So I copied over the directory and I initialized a git repo. But you want to do it in a proper way and follow those directions. So okay. So all the script is doing is just deleting a bunch of files. So it's deleting the ant build file and it's adding the Gradle build files. It's just deleting a bunch of properties files. This is probably the most important thing, is that it's moving the Java from source org, which is an InterMine thing, to the default place where it normally should be. So this looks like what we had before. We have our DB model and web app directories, as we would hope. So the DB model now has a build file in it, and it also has our normal config files, as does web app. So it has these Gradle executables. So this is the wrapper right here that I told you that we would provide with Gradle. So you don't want to use your installed Gradle, you want to use our wrapper right here. And also we have our normal project XML file. So these are new. So we have 3 new Gradle files. So the build Gradle file is useful. You might edit this, I suppose. It's got the repositories that it uses to get the jars. It has your dependencies, and you can define some tasks. So Gradle's a full scripting language, so you can add some tasks there for you. You will not change settings Gradle because that just defines which projects are here, but you will change Gradle properties. These are system properties, so they're available system-wide, and they set which InterMine version that you are going to be used. So this determines which jar Maven downloads. So we have it by default set to 2.0 point plus, but you can change it to whatever you want. But when we upgrade to 2.1, this is where you're going to change the information. We update BlueJeans, you will need to change these numbers. And if you want a specific version, that's where you change it. So your mine, you're ready and set to go. So I'm going to do the same thing with the my data sources. So I'm going to go to Gradle Migration, and I'm going to go to data sources, and I'm going to give it the full path. And then this is going to do the same thing. So this goes through each data source and does just a bunch of deletes the old ant files and replaces it with our new Gradle files. It moves the Java to the default Maven directory. So let's take a look at that. So we have our data sources like we had before, but we also have some new Gradle files. So let's take a look at them. We'll take a look at this is just a data source, like you know what it looks like. So we got a properties file, we have a build Gradle file, we have our source directory, main and test, and Java and resources. So this is just the standard layout now. So we have the same Gradle files that we had in the web app. So we have build Gradle, we'll look at that. We have our executables, our Gradle W here. We have Gradle properties. These are the same properties, but the ones in the mine overwrite these. But let's take a look at settings Gradle. These are unlike the web app where you only had, or the mine where you only had the web app and DB model. Here, if you add a data source, this is where you'll add it. When you install, it goes through each project and creates the jar. So you want to list all your projects there. We won't use Gradle properties, but you will update build Gradle maybe. Again, it's got all your repositories where it looks for the jars. It's got the dependencies. And I want to point out this additions file. You can set a global additions file that will be in every data source. And I'm going to talk about that in detail, but I just wanted to point out that that's where you configure that in your biosources build Gradle file. Okay, and then that's it. So you run your two scripts. So you run it on your mine and you run it on your data sources, and it moves everything to the proper data directory structure and adds the Gradle files. So the next thing that you need to do is, so you want to install, and what that will do, that will compile your data sources and compile them, make them a jar, and put them on your class path in the M2 directory. So if I went right now and went to go build a mine, it would find an error because it wouldn't find my data sources yet because they're still Java. I haven't compiled them and made them a jar. So this isn't part of the migration process. This will be part of your development process. Anytime that you change your Java data sources, you will want to reinstall them. Note that the command is .gradlew, so we saw that executable. You want to use the provided Gradle wrapper instead of a locally installed Gradle. This is to keep everybody on the same Gradle version, so we don't have any surprises. And so every time you change the Java for your data sources, you will want to install them. So that'll update the jar that is being used by the build. So I am not going to run this right now because it's going to fail. And it's going to fail because when I did the copy, I copied off of the dev branch and I didn't make any changes to the dev branch. And we've made model changes. So the model changes aren't in the dev branch. So this would fail for two reasons. So first, we made some model changes. So the core model has changed. And in one of my data sources, I think, I treated taxon ID as an integer instead of a string. So when I try to install my data sources to use with my build, the compilation will fail because I didn't update the data model. So that's something that you will have to do before you're able to run a build. Now I made the changes on the release candidate branch, so that's where I did the build, but I failed here. And the second reason, so the second thing that you'll have to do is update your data sources additions file. So this is the config that I just showed you in biosources build Gradle. You can specify an extra additions file, and I'm going to tell you why that's necessary. So previously, everything was compiled in at the same time, merged into a single model and used. But now, since we've split up, since the InterMine stuff is now separated, it works a little bit different. And I made a beautiful chart for you to understand. So the way things work now is that the build looks in the project XML file. It gets all the additions files for all the projects in your file. It merges, and plus the core model. It merges them into a model, a file. It puts that model in the jar, and it makes that jar available to every data source. So for instance, if I had an NCBI parser and I reference probe set, I don't know why I would do that, and probe set was not in the additions file, that's fine. If it was, as long as it was somewhere here in some additions file somewhere, it would get merged into the model and then made available to every data source. That's not true anymore, and that's why you'll need to update your data sources. So in this case, the NCBI jar, if I create a probe set object and store to the probe set table, probe set will have to be in this model file, which is in the jar. So the model file comes from the core model, the NCBI additions, and then optionally that additions file that you create, the global one. So if I'm referencing dealing with probe set objects, probe set has to be defined in the model in one of these three files, one of these three places. So if you reference a class in your data parser, it has to be in the data model. So you can put it in the data model in two ways. You can put it in that source's additions file, or you can specify a single data model that will be merged into each data source, which might be simpler. So this is what some people did. So they saved their entire Mind data model, put it on the class path, so like in DB model resources, called it FlyMine additions, and made every other additions file empty just for simplicity. And then that was fine. But so those are the two things that you'll have to do probably if necessary. Maybe you were perfect and your additions files are all correct, and maybe I'm the only one who did it wrong. But you will have to update your parsers to be the new data model, and each jar, each data source has to be standalone. Okay, and that's it. So there were some things in script. So you have to do this manually. There's a property that you have to delete from your project XML file, or it'll fail. Biosources are now done on the class path. You'll have to set an environmental variable, Gradle ops, instead of ant ops. So it's the same parameters though, so just copy and paste and call it Gradle ops instead of ant ops. You'll want to append one attribute though, daemon equals false, to prevent daemons from being used. So let me tell you about daemons. Daemons are little helper processes that hang out in the background, and they are by default in Gradle enabled since version 3. And they sit around in the background and they make things faster. And the reason how they make things faster is they hold on to memory and hold on to resources to make it easy to reference again. But for better or worse, it doesn't work with how InterMine works. So you'll run out of memory mostly if you don't have this set, but you will sometimes get some weird errors when a daemon has a resource called. So be sure to add that attribute to your Gradle ops. Then you will want to update your project XML for some sources. So source change location. Protein Interpro has a new attribute. InterMine items XML isn't a valid type. You have to use a project name. And then source data directory can only have a location attribute. It can't have a value attribute. So you'll have to do a search and replace to replace value with location. Interpro, if you use that data source, the file interpro XML incorrectly references interpro DTT, which needs to be the full path. I contemplated putting this file in the data source jar, but I didn't feel like I wanted to be responsible for versioning it. I think that they should version their own, but they disagreed, so I don't know. And then, of course, you want to update each data source additions file to be correct and update with a new model. Alternatively, you can use the extra additions file. We just talked about that. And finally, post-process util moved to the bio package, so you may have to update your import to be the new location. And that's it. So that's the one-time update, upgrade procedure. And now I'll go through really quickly the commands that you're going to be using for Gradle from now on. So I just clicked on the bottom of the upgrade. There's a Gradle quick start. So this is a good reference for you. This is all the Gradle commands that will replace the ant commands that you have been using. So we talked about install. There's a link to the docs. So this will produce a jar, and that'll put in the Maven repository. All third-party jars that Gradle downloads, like for the InterMine and Apache Commons, will go in the Gradle directory here if you want to look at the actual jars. So here's the commands that you'll use to build DB, integrate, post-process. So these are very similar. To build your database, you're going to use the same exact project build script. I just changed the ant commands for the Gradle commands. But it's the same script, and we also moved it. But it's the same flags and everything. So that should be familiar. So that's a database. So the web app is also similar. You can use the same Tomcat that you use now, but we use cargo, so you're going to be using different tasks. It's cargo deploy remote to deploy the web app, to redeploy it, and then to undeploy. Cargo uses the same parameters as the current system, so you don't have to change anything there. We did add 2 new ones, so you can specify the protocol and the port. But that uses your current running Tomcat. We added another option, Greddy, which is Gradle and Jetty, which is embedded Tomcat, and these are the commands to use that. It does use port 8080, by the way, so don't you might have conflicts there. But this is useful for like development, just quick looking at stuff, and we use it for the tutorial because you don't have to configure or install Tomcat. So that's nice. Okay, and finally, BlueJeans. So you can start BlueJeans with this command. It uses the web services provided by a web app. So for the time being, if you have an InterMine web app running, you have to have an InterMine web app running to launch BlueJeans. It uses the mine name and URL from your FlyMine properties file, your mine properties file. So you don't have to have any extra configuration. And of course, you can specify a specific properties file. Gradle has a lot of helper tasks. So tasks, you can see what's available, clean, and install we talked about. And we talked about how to use the wrapper instead and not to use the daemons. So it's a little bit to get used to, but everybody who's upgraded really enjoys the Gradle. It's a much better development environment, development experience. So it's a little bit of effort, but I think you'll really enjoy, working with it and how fast you're able to do things and where InterMine goes with it. So if there's no questions, then I will stop my presentation.